Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the global disease issue keeping U.S. swine producers awake at night was African swine fever, a virulent disease that devastated the Chinese swine herd and ran rampant throughout several Eastern European countries. The virus was clearly something that hog farmers on this side of the ocean wanted to keep as far away as biologically possible. With China still struggling to rebuild its herd due to the continued presence in country, the implications for our domestic pork and feed markets in the U.S. are considerable. Welcome to Feedstuffs in Focus, our podcast taking a deeper look at big issues in the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries. I'm your host, Andy Vance. Thanks for joining us. This episode is sponsored by United Animal Health, a leader in animal health and nutrition. You can learn more about United Animal Health and how they're working to advance animal science worldwide by visiting the website unitedanh.com. Earlier this week, as part of the Global Hog Industry Virtual Conference hosted by National Hog Farmer, I spoke with Dr. Paul Sundberg, Executive Director of the Swine Health Information Center, also called SHIC, about the latest ASF developments around the globe. In this excerpt from that conversation, Dr. Sundberg also discusses research he and his colleagues are supporting in Vietnam, including the results of a recent study on rodents as a potential vector for the disease. Here's the first half of my conversation with Dr. Paul Sundberg. As you and your colleagues at SHIC monitor the ASF situation around the globe, you do a great job reporting each month some of the developments, and I'd like to just start with that 30,000-foot overview. What's happening around the world now with ASF? Are there any developments that the industry really needs to be aware of, things that are percolating recently?
If we talk about African swine fever around the world, the Eastern Europe continues to have ASF in feral pigs, and that is a risk for domestic production. ASF in Germany is only in feral pigs. It's not in their domestic production. Poland has periodic outbreaks in the commercial pigs, but those feral pigs, the wild boar in Eastern Europe is especially a risk. So there are periodic infections in Poland and other countries, Romania, in Russia. And of course, when you're talking about African swine fever and China, China is the largest pig herd in the world. And this is a virus that attacks pigs, and it does it very well. And so that's caused a lot of problems in China. It continues to do that. And there are continued outbreaks. There are some successes. But there are continued outbreaks in China as well as Southeast Asia. I think what we're learning from all of that experience is that there's a variety of ways that virus moves, and biosecurity to address those variety of different ways that virus can move is really the issue. Reports from China and Vietnam have been that on farms that have been able to implement high quality biosecurity and verify that, they've been able to stay negative. And that's a hard thing to do, but that seems to give some success. But as a general issue, African swine fever continues to put so much epidemiological pressure on North America, on Canada, the US, and Mexico, on South America, that we're all under risk of that because that epidemiological pressure, there's so much virus out there, so many ways it can move. And that's the thing that we're all working on in trying to prevent it from getting to us.
Yeah, we had a great update earlier this morning on some boots on the ground in China. And if folks didn't have a chance to watch that session and about some of the mega complexes that are being built in China, I would encourage you to go back and watch that session on demand, which, raises, I think, a good question, Dr. Sundberg, as you have been following this disease for, we're now in the years stage that you've been monitoring this. How difficult is it to get good, reliable, I'll say actionable data out of places like China? I mean, I think a lot of times from the market side of things, we'll hear numbers, particularly if it comes from the state news agencies and such, and we'll say, well, take that with a shaker of salt instead of a grain of salt, that sort of thing. But from a epidemiological standpoint, from a scientist perspective, how challenging is that to get good, quality, actionable data?
Well, it is a challenge. Thankfully, though, we have veterinarians in the U.S. that work in China, work in production in China, have contacts there. And so, yeah, it's a challenge because the official data doesn't always match what we're hearing from on the ground from those folks that have direct contacts there. So certainly it's a challenge. That's really one of the reasons why we went to Vietnam and started this project in Vietnam, because the issues of getting data freely sharing out of China is a hurdle. That's an issue. And so we went to Vietnam to start the project there because we have a better communication, a better opportunity for real data to come from Vietnam, Vietnamese production.
With that segue, and thanks for opening the door there into Vietnam specifically, which is really what I want to spend the bulk of our time on today. Give us the background of, and you've kind of given us some prelude to why we were looking into Vietnam, but describe the project for us, how it got underway, and where we are in development.
Sure. Back in 2013, when I was with the National Pork Board, and we got PED into the U.S., we had to scramble, and we did. We scrambled, and the researchers answered the call. Everybody, there's all hands on deck to try to figure out what we could do about this virus. It was a new one. We didn't know much about it. We had to look at control. We had to look at epidemiology. We had to look at disinfection. We had to do all of those things. In Vietnam, with African swine fever actually outbreaking in Vietnam, just like we had PED back in 2013, we had the opportunity to go and to answer those questions before it would get here. We don't have to scramble. We can look at all of those different questions in Vietnam and study it and get those answers real time in a country where ASF is active and breaking. In 2019, with the help of the National Pork Producers Council, we found a call for proposals and presented a proposal to the USDA Foreign Ag Service to help Vietnam, both with their preparation, their learning about it, about ASF, they're learning about their outbreak, what they can do about it, as well as then also to do those on-farm type of projects where we could learn the lessons. A variety of different research priorities. We developed a research priority list, went to, had an open call for proposals in the US, and went to not just universities, but there are companies that are involved, private companies that are involved in this research, although with contacts in Vietnam. And so that's the process. That's the background of this. We've got good projects going on there. We've got some preliminary results. We're in the process now, and we're going through the process. I think we're going to learn these lessons before ASF gets to the U.S.
How different is the Vietnamese pork industry from our industry stateside? So when you're taking that data in or taking those learnings in, how easy or difficult is it to extrapolate that to, okay, this is what this might mean for hog farms in Iowa, as an example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's an issue. That's one that we have to be very careful about. We don't want to extrapolate. We want to take the pigs and the farms that are in Vietnam that mirror those that are in the US, and we want to and we're doing these projects on those farms. I went to Vietnam in September of 2019 before COVID hit, and went to different farms. And I will tell you that the farms that we're working with, the farms we're working on with those researchers and those folks in Vietnam, you could put those into Iowa, you could put those into any place in the US, those farms, and they've got the same genetics, they've got the same pigs, they've got very similar facilities or the same facilities. So there's not any extrapolation. That's an important piece of this.
Yeah, I had the feeling that there was some thought to that, and it's really interesting. I think sometimes when we talk about, say, the Chinese pork industry in general, if you haven't been there and seen it or dealt with some of those larger types, you think, oh, well, that's a totally different industry than ours. And in some cases it is, but Vietnam's a different animal yet, entirely somewhere, in between those. let's talk about some of the results that are coming out of this, because as I was reading through some of your notes, wealth of information on the SCHC website, by the way, if folks haven't been to swinehealth.org lately, there really is a wealth of information there. But understand we're already getting some information back in results in terms of vectors that we might be concerned about. What have we learned so far on this study on rodents as a vector for ASF, as an example?
Yeah, South Dakota State University did a great job of looking at rats and mice on Vietnamese farms during outbreaks. They trapped rats on a variety of different farms across the country for up to 30 days during the time of an ASF outbreak on those farms. The primary question was if there is a role for rats to be able to move, either biologically, for example, eating feed or carcass or whatever that may have ASF, and move that ASF through their intestinal system to help spread it, or physically help move ASF within the farm or between farms, on their feet, on their fur. And so they went and trapped rats on these farms that were breaking, tested them for the virus, and they didn't find any. On an active infection, breaking right real time, catching those rodents on those farms, they weren't able to find any ASF on or in them. They took that information, we went to the laboratory and purposefully inoculated rats with ASF to see if it would make them sick or see if they could carry it. We put contact rats in the same cages with those, and there wasn't any transmission between the rats either. So it doesn't say that it can't happen. You always, if you have a positive result on some research, you say, aha, we found it. This one is it's kind of puzzling. It's kind of concerning because it didn't happen. I think what it amounts to is simply that we won't say it's impossible, but we will say that should move the risk of ASF transmission by rats and mice down farther on the list. Another example that just came out in the press was a project in, I think it was in Eastern Europe, one of the European countries, that trapped mosquitoes and tested, it might have been in Poland because this was in a live infection as well, tested mosquitoes for ASF and couldn't find any virus in those mosquitoes either. So, those are the lessons that we're learning about this virus, and that's the reason we're doing this research.
Yeah, I think that you said something that I was thinking as well. It's kind of puzzling, that because you're a veterinarian, so I'm guessing, you've been counseling folks for a long time on the importance of rodent control as part of your biosecurity strategy. Did you go into a study like this thinking, okay, this is probably a vector we need to be concerned about? Like, so when you look at the results, you say, that's not at all what I expected to see. What were your thoughts going in and coming out?
Well, yeah, certainly, myself, I did expect to find ASF. I didn't expect to find it in the rats because ASF doesn't infect rodents, but I did expect to find it on top of them, on their fur, on their feet. I was surprised that happened. And to rats and mice, to rodent biosecurity, we know that can be an issue here in the U.S. So yeah, you can't say, oh, it's okay, don't worry about rats and mice. That's still a biosecurity issue that people have to pay attention to. I think, like I said, though, for ASF and the purposefully looking directly at outbreaks with this, rats and mice probably are lower on that list of things that we have to go after with ASF. Doesn't take them off, does not take rats and mice biosecurity issues off, but it gives some data about the priority of ASF in rats and mice.
So when we look at all these different potential vectors, and we've had researchers like Scott D. and Megan Niederwerder and others who are studying this on previous editions of the Global Hog Industry Virtual Conference, as well as at our sister publication Feedstuffs via our Feedstuffs 365 program. So we've talked about feed as a vector as an example. There are all these different transportation as a vector. As you start getting more and more research and data, both benchtop lab type studies and these on the ground studies from places like Vietnam. Where are your priorities right now if you're thinking about this as an epidemiologist and as importantly for our audience, as a producer and integrator? Where are you really keeping your eye on the ball right now based on what you're seeing from the data we have so far?
Well, so really what we're talking about there is you're talking about prevention. And let's put prevention at the top of the list of what everybody's trying to do. And so what you do is you rank and prioritize those risks. Make sure you've got the top risks taken care of. Keep working your way down, because you're really only as good as that bottom risk that you may be ignoring. And that might be the problem. So certainly when you talk about ASF movement and movement within a country and movement to a country, animals are the primary risk. There's no doubt about that. Animals are the primary risk. But I think one of the lessons that you see in Europe, especially in Europe with movement of ASF, for example, from Poland to Belgium, which happened a few years ago, that virus moves at something like 60, 70 miles an hour down the highway, because the virus may be in a pork product, which is no risk to any person. That's absolutely not a food safety issue. But if that sandwich gets thrown out of a window and a feral pig gets a hold of it, they're going to get it. So that includes for the U.S. our risk of illegal import of pork products from countries that have ASF. And that's where USDA does a great job with the border protection and working on the borders. So that's a very important piece. That extends all the way to the farm and to policies on the farm about having pork sandwiches at lunch or brought in or whatever. Those things have to be paid attention to, because that certainly is a risk. And then you get to the other things that we continue to work on, like soybean meal and feed risks and importation of soybean meal or other products from countries that have ASF. Those types of things, you work your way down. One project that we've got going on right now with the National Pork Board, that's helping to fund this as well, is doing a national biosecurity risk assessment, looking at all of our risks from the borders all the way to the farms and movement of pigs within the U.S., trying to do a comprehensive look at the different biosecurity risks that might help introduce or transmit a foreign animal disease to the U.S. or around the U.S. And that's going to be done this summer. It'll be done at the end of June. So we're looking forward to that. We've got some preliminary things that we're talking about there. But that one's going to help us, because it's going to give us an assessment to make sure we're not missing something. That's the important thing. We ask those folks to look and see, we know what we know, but we want you to find out what we don't know and help us to identify those things.
For the latest news on diseases of concern to the swine industry, as well as the latest research on critical issues such as African swine fever, subscribe to the Feedstuffs Daily e-newsletter. And to watch the rest of my conversation with Dr. Paul Sundberg from the Swine Health Information Center, visit the Global Hog Industry Virtual Conference online. You can watch every session now on demand. Just visit nationalhogfarmer.com to register. This episode of Feedstuffs in Focus is sponsored by United Animal Health, a leader in animal health and nutrition. You can learn more about United Animal Health and how they're working to advance animal science worldwide by visiting the website unitedanh.com. I'm Andy Vance, and you've been listening to Feedstuffs in Focus. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to hear more conversations about some of the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms, including Apple and Google Podcasts. Or you can check out our website, feedstuffs.com, for future episodes. Until next time, have a great day, and thanks for listening.